Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for an Entrepreneur's Dream featuring Rob Ryan, class of 69, co-founder of Ascend Communications. My name is Amanda Hatcher, and I run the Cornell Entrepreneur Network, or more commonly called CEN. And today's program is part of a monthly series brought to you by CEN and Entrepreneurship at Cornell, or E at C. We've been partnering since April to bring the Cornell community direct access to distinguished Cornell experts and are thrilled to be with you today. You can learn more about CEN and E at C and also our previous programs via the links I'll put in chat in just a minute. So before we get started, let me run us through a couple of housekeeping items real quick. First, our format for today will be Q&A. Thank you to everyone that submitted questions in advance. We'll also be taking your questions live via the chat, so please be sure to type those in during the program. We'll do our best to weave them into our conversation and get to as many as possible. And last, we are recording this program, so you can watch it again later. Just give us a couple days to get it posted, and I'll be sure to put the link in the chat so you know where to find it. So let's get started. I'm honored to welcome Rob Ryan, class of 69, co-founder and former CEO of Ascend Communications. Rob, together with his wife Terry, who's also class of 69, actually gave the foundational gift to start CEN, this program, almost 20 years ago. So because of you, Rob, is why we're here today. And I can't thank you enough. I've been with CEN 12 years, and it's just been amazing. So thank you so much. And also, yeah, thank you. And also with us today is my colleague, Zach Shulman, class of 87, Law 90, and he's the Director of Entrepreneurship at Cornell. And I'm gonna pass it off to him to get us started with the questions. So thank you both for being with us today, and take it away, Zach.
Great, thanks, Amanda. And Rob, nice to see you again, as always. Yeah, so listen, we can't thank you enough for taking the time today and for all you do and have done for Cornell. And also thank you to all the people online. Right now we have over 200, which is fabulous. Thanks for tuning in and sharing your thoughts with us and questions. As a reminder, today's event will be recorded and it will be available both on the CEN live stream channel, and Amanda will put that into the chat box so you can all see it. It also will be on the Entrepreneurship at Cornell YouTube channel, which is very easy to find right through the Entrepreneurship at Cornell website. Quick preview for next month. We're going to be featuring on October 22nd, Kathy Merrill, who is the class of 91. She is the CEO of the Washingtonian magazine. We thought we would do that right before the election. Kathy will be busy, obviously, with the election. So that should be a really interesting webinar. And just keep your eyes open for that. I wanted just to let you know that two things. One, please do use the chat box for your questions. I'll be looking at it periodically throughout the webinar, and use that as opposed to the Q&A box if you can. I'm sure I'll still get questions in the Q&A, but I prefer them to all be in chat if possible. And the other thing is, when I look up, I'm not looking away or I'm not praying. I am looking at my other monitor, which is just above my camera. And that's where a bunch of my questions show up. So I just wanted to give you the heads up on that. Okay, so before we get started, again, my name is Zach Shulman. I am the Director of Entrepreneurship at Cornell. It is a university-wide entrepreneurship program run at the university. And we serve thousands and thousands of students each year, and also faculty and staff, and also alumni, of course. And I want to just add on to, not only did Rob fund the program, but I literally remember being in the Entrepreneurship at Cornell meeting when Rob announced this, and I was sitting next to John Jaquette, who used to run the program. He just retired 7 years ago. And Rob just sort of casually mentioned, yeah, Terry and I are going to fund this new program, and we're going to plop down, I think it was like $500,000 or something, I can't remember, but it was a lot of money. And we're going to, plop down this money to start it. Anybody have any problems? And the room was just like, this is awesome. I mean, it was just like the funniest kind of, this is before I really knew Rob well, but now I come to find out, or I've come to learn, that's just Rob's style. You know, like, let's just put it on the table and have some fun. So Rob, thank you again for doing that. CEN has just been a wonderful program, and thanks to Amanda and her team for running
Well,
it. So
you and John Jaquette made it the wonderful program with Amanda and other people. I mean, it went from nothing on the map at Cornell to, you know, and believe it or not, there was a time Cornell didn't think entrepreneurship was worth interacting with, and that was 20 plus years ago. But now I believe it's everywhere. I believe you couldn't go anywhere in any school without hearing about entrepreneurship. So that's a big, big hill you traveled.
Yep, no, we're doing our best. Hey Amanda, I just want to give you a heads up. I just got a text. Oh, you're already addressing it. Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about Ascend today, and its successful company building and exit. But before we get there, there's this big time gap from the time you graduated from Cornell in 1969 until Ascend started in 1988. And I'm wondering if you could briefly tell us a little bit about what you did in those 17 years.
So I'd be happy to, but before I start waxing eloquent on myself, I want to share a shout out to, first of all, my wife. And I've been married to Terry for 50 years. Our anniversary was 2 weeks ago. We were married at the Cornell Chapel. She's been a partner through all of this, including Ascend. She was a co-founder in Ascend. And I also have an announcement. On my anniversary, my partners, Liz and Jay from Austin, Texas, were out there for incorporation of a new company called Sunvia, which all I'll say is has machine learning and gaming technology and critical thinking platform based on Sunflower, which you know nothing about yet. So it was kind of an interesting day. 50 years later, you know, Terry and I are doing it again.
Good.
So now to cover those 30 years or whatever it was from 69 on up to 89 roughly, I don't want to bore you with all of the different ins and outs, but I do want to have a theme through it. I started to get into what I called computer networking very, very early on. So my first job was at Lawrence Livermore Lab, and they were doing a precursor to ARPANET, building a network connecting all the fusion centers in the country. And I was a programmer and trying to learn about these things called protocols and algorithms for the design of a network. I moved from there to Digital Equipment Corporation, and Digital had the same problem. They wanted to tie up their computers in a network. When they sold the customer computers, they wanted to be able to network them. And Digital was into distributed networking, not centralized networking. So I began to learn how to design protocols. I designed the routing algorithms, the congestion algorithms for DECnet, and also how to defend them and put them into specifications. All of this is important for the next jump in the career, which was Intel Corporation. And there at Intel Corporation, I worked with people from DEC and from Xerox to build the specification that became known as the Ethernet Blue Book, and it later was the IEEE standard. But it also began to be a standard for standards. So in other words, that spec was used as the model for writing specs going forward. We also designed the Ethernet chip, and it became a big hit, and it was used in the whole Ethernet network. Ethernet touched the internet in the following way. With Ethernet, you could tie server farms together and build a nascent cloud. So it was a pretty big deal. In some ways, it's as big a deal as the Ascend deal, but I never monetized it into any Ascend-like company. I got awards from Intel as a head of, Ted Helpful was the best engineer at Intel, but other than a $1,000 check, it never materialized. So all of these different items always were on computer networking, and then Ascend started.
So I'm kind of tempted just to call you a networking geek. I mean, it sounds like that's what you did forever. since you graduated with your math and physics degree, and then you went on and had this big company experience at DEC and Intel, and then you decided to start your own company.
Yeah, there was one stop in between that I almost missed, which is, you'll all laugh, but I was at Hayes Microcomputer as R&D head, and we did the V32 modem, and now nobody knows what that is, but it gave 19.2 kilobits worth of bandwidth, which is an amazing amount of bandwidth, and PC to PC communications over the internet were allowed. So it was a real big deal for those that were living back at that point in time.
Yeah, who could send like little chat messages or something, probably.
Yeah.
That's great.
So after that, Ascend started. Now the founders of Ascend were Terry, Steve Speckenbach, hardware designer, Jay Duncanson, marketing and hardware, and Jeanette Simons, who was my architect, chief engineer for software development. And when we initially started, we didn't have anything particularly in mind other than the team wanted to do something in networking, right? That was obvious. And we put a plan together for, at the time, ISDN networking, which was, we were going to build the on-ramp and the off-ramp to a new service called ISDN that the public carriers were going to unfold on us. And we raised some money from Kleiner Perkins and Greylock, some very good venture people, a couple of $1 million. And off we went, and we designed and built this box that looked like the size of a refrigerator. There was only one small problem. The carriers did not deploy the service. So we had the box, but we had nothing to connect it to. So that began an adventure in which a couple of things happened. The venture people were going to terminate the company because it didn't have any prospects. But what happened is they really liked the team. The strength of the team was so compelling to them that they ended up terminating 4 other startups and leaving us alone, even though we deserved termination as well. So we reinvented ourselves into a thing called multiband, which is a way to add bandwidth up. And we're doing that for the video conferencing world. But it wasn't PC conferencing, it was room conferencing back then. And you know, we built a company of about 15 million in sales, profitable 15 million in sales, but it really had 80% market share, so it didn't have anywhere to go. So the VCs, once again, another tipping point. This tipping point was they were going to sell the company for 30 million. Now their deal with us is they got 2x before any of what they put in, before anyone dipped in the pond. Well, they happened to put in 17 million. So 2x is 34, that covers the 30, which means the rest of the employees and the founders got absolutely nothing, which wasn't really a happiness for me and the founders and others. So we had a lot of jawboning with the board, and pretty much, I think I indicated to them that most of the company and all of the engineering would quit if we were sold to whomever they were selling us to. And they got a pause in their throat and asked me what I wanted. And I said, I want a year's time to reinvent ourselves again. And since they really didn't have any choice, because if I disclosed that we were all quitting, they had to disclose that to the buyer.
Right, there would have been no company to sell, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It was kind of mean on me, but it did work. We got the 1 year time, and we then sat down as a team. Now imagine a team that's very high strung, high performance, all of them very aggressive, and you got them in the room and you've got to reinvent the company while continuing to run the company. And at a whiteboard, I began a process where we started with our core competencies. We took a day and a half to figure out what they were. And by the way, we decided it was digital dialing and networking software, and we had a lot of adjectives on that. And we started to ideate off of that. We started to create. I said, given that we have competencies in the wide area networking area, give me ideas that use one or more of our competencies. And the team started throwing up ideas. Now imagine those ideas going up on a whiteboard horizontally on the whiteboard. At the time, they came up with maybe 10 different ideas and industries we could play in, perhaps do well because of our competencies. Then I asked the team, how are we going to judge one from the other? And we can't just sit here and argue. Why don't we put down criteria? And they said, well, what is criteria? And I said, things like competition, speed to market, size of market. Let's put all of those things down. So we started putting a criteria map down. And it was
it sounds a bit like a business model canvas for each of the different columns.
It is like that. And we ended up with a matrix. So it became the criteria versus the ideation matrix, and we scored it. Every single person scored independently. So there was no bullyism in there. If you wanted to vote 1 through 5, with 5 as being the best score, and you wanted to give it 1 and the rest of the team gave it a 5, I would always look at that as an opportunity to ask Zach at that point what you know that the rest of us don't know, because you've given it a 1. And we went through this, and it would take us 3 days to go through the scoring and the discussion. Finally, we had a winner. We added it up and we had a winner. And the winner of this whole ideation exercise was the infrastructure of the internet. The second place winner was a thing called remote access, what we're doing now. Third place winner was telecommuting, similar to what we're doing now. And the fourth place was our existing multi-band business. It was in 4th place. So the team looked at that and was a little puzzled, but they did actually like the process. And they asked, what's next? And I said, let's do a walkabout. But a walkabout for me was real walkabout. We called 200 internet service providers. We went out and visited 200 internet service providers. Each of us had 4 questions. Each of us went out to 40 or 50 while we were doing our day job. And what we discovered is that the internet was going bankrupt. It was blacking out. Most of the internet service providers were near bankruptcy. The reasons they were near bankruptcy was several-fold. They, every point of presence, so a point of presence is something that serves you in a, say, a 3 or 4 or 5 mile radius. They had to guess how many boxes to put inside of that, but they also had to guess what protocol box it was, because you could dial in with different kind of protocols. And so it was a hopeless exercise. And what happened is, to make money, they would sell 50 subscriptions, but only have 1 plug. So you were always getting a busy signal. So the internet was very close to blackout at that point in time.
So, hey, Rob, just let me interrupt for 1 second. So basically, you guys did extreme customer discovery in your walkabout.
Yes.
So these are the terms that we all use now, right? And of course, you were using different terms back in 1989, but for the same concepts. I mean, so that's actually really cool that you were doing what, you know, everyone thinks is like this big business epiphany from 2000 on. You were doing it back in 1989. I think that's pretty cool. So you did this big walkabout, you got all these cool answers, or good input from the customer. Do you by chance remember what the questions were? The 4 questions?
I do. One question was, what keeps you up at night as an owner of this internet service provider? What are the challenges that you're facing? And they would actually talk to us quite openly. Another question was, what is the extinction event for you, the ISP, the internet service provider? What is going to make you go bankrupt? Because they were very, very close to that. And the third question was, how technically, with our competencies, by that time they understood our competencies, could we help you? Many of them actually sat down and started designing products on napkins and whiteboards with us. The fourth question I always loved to ask, because I'd say, why are you dealing with such a little tiny company as Send, instead of Cisco Systems or Lucent or Alcatel, all of which were multi-billion-dollar companies at that point? And they would tell me the answer to that as well. They told me that, you know, Cisco didn't really have an understanding of wide area networking. They were not committing to doing any products in that area. And basically, they didn't have any confidence in them. So when I got done with the walkabout, I had this incredible amount of information, more than I had before, didn't I? And I also knew that the lead competitors were not anywhere close. I went back to the team and the board, and we put together, and here's the grand finality. I put together a plan called the King of Plan. I asked.
I'm sorry. It was called the what plan?
The King of.
King of. Okay.
So I asked the team, what do we want to do? We have this infrastructure thing. It looks like we can play in it. We haven't designed a product in it. What is our expression for the whole corporation? And we all kind of banged it around. We said, we want to be the king of the entire worldwide internet infrastructure. Every single telephone company, internet service provider, point of presence in the world will have Ascend equipment. A very modest goal that we actually,
Yeah.
So when you do modest goals like that, you actually have to put together stratagems and an execution plan. Stratagems are things that will tilt the table when you're in competition. So ideally, you're trying to tilt things so that customer delight goes up, customer stickiness goes up, and the probability of success of a competitor goes down. And each time you add more layers onto your original product, you're doing that. You're creating a lower probability for the competition and greater delight with the customers and stickiness. We ended up building all those stratagems into an execution plan. That means every person in the company feathered up to that king of goal. They were working on things that could, go back in the decision tree back to the king of. It's an unusual way to run a company, but we did it that way. If we had a board meeting, all we had to do is tell them our status against the king of picture.
So I'm curious, Rob, did you come up with the term king of?
Yeah. And I used it back then.
How about the term walkabout? Did you come up with that term too?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I didn't publicize any of this. In other words, I didn't write up in books or do anything. Obviously, I made.
Well, you were kind of busy. You were busy.
And I was busy. So
yeah.
Off we went, and then Ascend began to go from the 15, 16 million we were at to 40 million, to 180 million, to 560 million, to 1.2 billion. It was a rocket ship. So the Nike curve was vertical. It did achieve its goal of being king of pop. It had all of the pops throughout the universe that had internet service at that point in time. And I believe it helped save the internet from an extinction event. There were many extinction events on the internet, and my partner, Jay Williams, was party to several others as a software designer and software developer in the early days. But we played a role in the communications in the end.
Yeah.
And Sunflower played the role to give us a predictive, rational model that collectively, a collaborative effort of a team could get to an answer. And I've used it since then, by the way, just out of curiosity for everybody, with 5 other companies, all of them multi-billion-dollar companies that had multi-billion-dollar endings. So it wasn't just Ascend.
Right.
One-trick pony wasn't a one-trick pony.
No, but it sounds like the one-trick pony was created by your work at Ascend. Like you thought of the concept, the sunflower model. You didn't call it that way back then, and it has since evolved into the sunflower. We'll get to the sunflower a little bit later. I want to just read a quote that came in from one of the people on the webinar, if you don't mind. So I'm going to look up at my screen because it's actually kind of sums it all up. It says, "I started working at Ascend 2 years after funding and continued through the IPO and acquisition by Lucent, now Nokia. I can't thank Rob enough for providing the opportunity to jump onto a rocket ship," which you've explained. "We went through major product changes. Each time Rob provided the vision and executed on product delivery, customer acquisition in the process, turning opportunities into giant revenue streams. I learned a ton watching him up close and from his leadership team." And then she said, "I'm glad to see you speak today." So that was from Mickey DeCini. I don't know if you remember Mickey or not, but that was
Yes,
a real long time ago. So you've explained the concept behind it, Sandy. You explained it quite clearly. Thank you for that. Enabling the internet is basically what you did. You've explained how you came up with the concept through this walkabout and the poster board. I think that's, you know, kind of like grassroots, old school, smart. Can you name some of the biggest challenges? I mean, like, so you built the company from 15 million up to whatever it was, 1.2 billion in sales, and the VCs were the same VCs, right? They let you restart. They stayed with you. They must have been delighted. You stepped down. So the company goes public in '95. I'd like you to talk about that a little bit. But you did step down as the CEO. I'm curious to know why. So maybe address the IPO and you changing roles.
Yeah, there's quite a story there. So the company went public in 1994. So it was 5 years to the day from when we started in early '89. And I had a major spine operation just after taking the company public. So I did the IPO with my co-founder, Jay, and it was a very successful IPO. And literally I went to the Silverado party in Napa Valley for all of the employees. And it was Friday through Sunday. And then Monday morning early, I was in for major spinal surgery, front and back they were going through. And I actually went in there inebriated a little bit, but that's just more information than you needed. You know, but it was a great way to go into a surgery. So, you know, after I got back, I had less interest in doing hundreds of thousands of miles flying around. I obviously had succeeded as an entrepreneurial CEO very well. And it was time for me to hang up the spurs. So what we did is I migrated to chairman of the board, but after a while, I didn't want to do that. And I'll tell you why, because if you're chairman of the board and you have a person coming up as your CEO now, who was my second in command, then he doesn't really have freedom to be the CEO because Rob is always there, right?
Right.
And so I decided, sort of like Patton, to walk off. There were no more wars, to walk off or ride off on the white horse. And it was also good, by the way, because if I was chairman, I couldn't sell my shares. So we kind of rode off into the distance, and the company acquired quite a few other companies. It didn't organically build any more products, but it acquired Cascade and other companies. And the valuation got built up to over 24 billion, where it was then sold to Lucid at that inflated. But it wasn't so inflated. At that time, our revenue projections were 3.6 billion.
Okay.
So it was 6 or 7x multiple of the revenues, which our revenues were high and our profits were enormous. At one point, Ascend was touted as the #1 revenue per employee company and profit per employee company in the whole United States.
Wow.
So
I'm gonna switch. Yep. So that explains that well. Thank you very much. I want to take a couple of questions off the chat actually, because they're actually pretty interesting. In no particular order. We're interested in learning about your take on China and in particular technology, let's call it sharing. Some people might call it something else. To what extent should we be concerned about this?
Well, that's a good question. I have to say that I was fortunate not have to deal with China, right? So in my times, China didn't even have an internet service to bother with. Japan was the power during my times. But I'll project forward now into the current times, as hard as it is for me to do that being a dinosaur. But I'll project forward, and let me put it this way. China, to me, is like fool's gold. It glitters, it shimmers, but in the end, you give away your core technologies in order to touch the gold. And so that isn't a good trade-off. If I were running as a CEO now, any deals I would make with China would be protecting my core competencies in a million ways, or they wouldn't be any deal, because it's a fool's goal. It glimmers, but if you lose all of your competencies along the way and you've got 10 Chinese competitors, in 2 years, what have you gained, really?
Sorry guys, my son is trying to steal something off my desk. So he doesn't realize that I'm on a webinar with 300 people, but that's okay. I will give him the stapler. Here you go. Sorry about that. So you've already, I think, attributed or given us the reasons for Ascend's success, because you did all this customer discovery. You figured out exactly what the problem was and you basically nailed it, right? But what was the key to scaling the company over time? Like, did you have to change mindsets of the team? Did you have to augment the team, get new people in? How did you as the CEO actually manage that? And I'm actually personally curious to see how you would divide up the time as the CEO. Like, I always like to say the CEO is the chief psychologist, and therefore half of the time of the CEO is spent dealing with people on their team in the whole company. I'm curious to get your take on that too.
Yeah, so scaling is obviously a hard job when you have a rocket ship, the way Ascend was. The first things we did is we had an operating officer, a chief operating officer. That isn't my core competency. My core competencies are partly what I already talked to you about, strategy in terms of really divining where we go and why we go, and people, interacting with customers and with the employees to keep the rocket ship on track. But day to day, management and logistics of day to day, we had a chief operating officer, later called president, which was a good move. And then you just try to do what we did in the early days. In the early days, the first 100 employees, I interviewed each of them at their homes with their wives or their spouses, and to try to discern what they were getting in bed with, and what they were going to get out of me and what I was going to receive from them. But as the company grew, you couldn't do that. We had over 5,000 employees. Obviously, you weren't doing that anymore. We just tried, and it was a constant battle. My battle was always with the chief operating guy, because I'm always looking for A+. I'm really bored with B's and C's. And he's trying to fill roles, right? And so you got to get some B's in there. I don't think we did C's, but you got to get some B's in there as well. So it was a constant. I'm entrepreneur in the old school startup stage. And it's very rare, by the way, for an entrepreneur or co-founder in a startup stage to achieve IPO-dom. When I asked my board members how many actually have made that, they said a very low percentage of standing there, receiving the accolades of the IPO, because they're replaced. And by the way, I was going to be replaced no fewer than 13 times, according to the board members, Dick Kramlich and of NEA and Klein & Perkins. They had, meetings, and I only thought, by the way, that it was 4 or 5, but apparently it was 13, times, and I survived. Each time I survived. One time they actually brought a consultant in, interviewed all the employees in the company about me. Yeah. All of the employees got interviewed, and that 360. It saved me, because the employees, especially the engineers and manufacturing, and so it saved me. I think if they had wanted, they could have thrown me out the door right there, right?
Right. Let me interject for a second. So 13 times is a lot of times. I think it's safe to say that you're not a paranoid person when it comes to leadership. If you were paranoid, you probably would have been tossed out of phase 1.
I think what I told them is that I'm not going to be your puppet. You'll never be able to lift my arms and make my feet work. I'm going to make decisions and make them on my own brain. If you don't like them, you can fire me. Well, that's what they were doing. It was about, several times, at least, a dozen times. But I felt good, because when I did this, I said, in the end, I'm going to be sitting on a rocking chair. One way or the other, I'm going to say, I don't want to say I shouldn't follow those assholes. I'm going to say I followed me. And maybe it worked and maybe it didn't work. And obviously it worked. But I didn't want to go following advice of different people and whispering in my ear or putting pressure in my ear. Because frankly, it isn't the way I wanted to do it. And I wouldn't do it that way now either in the new company.
Right. I'm going to take another question. It says, this is from another panel, another attendee. I worked in the professional services group at Cascade Communications in Westford, Mass. in 1996 and 1997 until Cascade was acquired by Ascend in the fall of 97. I would like to hear Rob talk about the acquisition of Cascade.
Yeah, so first of all, my philosophy in acquisitions was very, very different than my second in command. My philosophy is as an entrepreneur. So I was holistically building things. And when I acquired things, I acquired tiny little companies that you might call them engineering companies. They had 5 or 6 engineers. They had a dog. They had a house office mom, and maybe 1 salesperson. And we would acquire these little companies for the engineers and the little product. We would brand the product. We'd have the engineers and we have them scattered around. Those were the kind of acquisitions I enjoyed. The larger acquisitions, such as Cascade, are always very difficult because you're taking different cultures and you're trying to smash them together. First of all, you have an East Coast Boston culture with Cascade, and you have an Ascend Silicon Valley culture. Not easy smashing things together. Both very good companies. Cascade, absolute leader in their area, which is why we were interested. They had the equipment and the points of presence that we weren't doing. We wanted to close out everyone from the point of presence, only Ascend equipment inside. So it's hard, it's a difficult transition. The bigger transitions tend to not go as they are foreseen. Yes, you do acquire revenue, right? You're going to acquire a Cascade's revenue, which I believe were hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars at the time. I'm not a big fan of those big acquisitions when you hear ABC buys XYZ and they're both giants. Yeah. Because to me, they're like 2 anchors and you wrap the 2 anchors together, they go to the bottom, just as fast, maybe faster. So I don't look to do those kind of big acquisitions, but it did, remember the king of the pop statement. That pop was owned by Cascade, Ascend, and Cisco. When we took Cascade, we now owned like 90% of the equipment and the points of presence throughout the world. So it was strategically a sound, decision.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How about this one? When you look at the latest developments, such as the SpaceX Starlink, has networking evolved as you had anticipated? And where do you think it might be 5 to 10 years from now?
Well, funny you should ask that because Jay, who's on this webinar, is my director of IT, including for the ranch, and he's my co-founder of the new company. Because we suffer out here in rural Montana, it's really difficult to get bandwidth, right? And we've got a hokum kind of thing, which we struggle with pretty much daily. Well, I'm sure I've got the best bandwidth picture in the whole county, and it's not exactly something that you would look at and say, wow, that's good. So I'm all for Elon Musk. In fact, I'm hoping to be an alpha user with Jay, bringing it to Montana and to I have properties in Hawaii. Because that also is a rural setting and the bandwidth is incredibly hard to get. Yeah, it is taking the direction I hoped it would, and it'll be ubiquitous, and I hope it works like really, really good, and so I can get it really, really fast.
And as it spreads around the world, not just here, but China, India, etc. What about the data privacy concerns?
Well, you're always going to be challenged with that. I mean, China is China, right? People operating in that domain have to adhere to the country rules. And there's a risk that the services get balkanized And that is going on right now. You know,
Yep.
because China may not like any security and privacy that you put in your products because they want to control. They don't want anybody to lock them out. All of that, I don't think is going to change any, and it'll be a struggle, you know, for the ubiquitous services to stay non-balkanized.
Yep. I'm going to switch topics again. By the way, we have more questions in this chat than I think we've had for any other webinar so far. This is our 5th one, by the way. So it just shows how present this conversation is. How do you find A+ employees? How do you ascertain in your interviews work ethic, hard work, honesty, motivation?
You know, that's a good question. I'm not motivated by money. My wife would tell you that I forget to put money in my wallet and have gone on business trips with an empty wallet. And an empty credit card, forgot the credit card too. So I'm more motivated by, I like to transform things and I like to be number one. I'm not happy being number 2 or number 3. And so I like to always say that I don't care what the odds are and who says I can do or can't do something. If you get the right set of people together and they're on a mission, many times you can do things that people say you can't. For example, multiband, when we came up with it, all the carriers said no. Everybody said that it can't work. And we said, yeah, it can work. And yeah, we made it work and we grew it to that $16 million little business. So I'm kind of motivated when people say it can't work, you can't do that. And I'm motivated by doing transformational things. You know, you walk on this earth, if you're lucky, I'm 72. If you're lucky for maybe 85 years, I'm hoping 103 personally, and do you leave a footprint? Do you leave a footprint? Does anyone even know or give a shit that you are on here? Did you transform anything? And why not? You know, everyone in this audience has a brain that's very powerful. You know, I always say, go, take a chance. Why Terry was so important as a partner to me is she would always say, go take that chance. I'm an attorney. I'll keep the bread on the table. You go take that chance, and either you make it or you don't. You know, we'll be okay. If you don't make it, we'll sit there in a smaller home, not a ranch in Montana, you know, and we'll be on our rocking chairs then, you know. So
it kind of sounds like it's
partner, by the way, through life is essential to being a transformative entrepreneur. Although Elon Musk probably, you know, and others seem to change partners, but I'm the old-fashioned kind.
We probably appreciate that. It kind of sounds like what we tell students, by the way, which is always start your company while you're a student, because if you fail, you still got your school to go to, so it's okay. I want to jump to the sunflower model after one other question. So can you share with us some of your memorable lessons in dealing with VCs?
Yeah, sure. One lesson I already shared with you, which is, you know, a VC community that sits on your board or is going to start to give you advice, and you're wanting to follow the advice, right? Because they gave you money. So why not follow the advice? Well, here's the deal. They kind of give you the advice and yank you this way and yank you this way. You're like a spinning top. If it all works out, they'll be sure to take the full credit for it. But 99% of the time, the advice they give you will just have you spinning, and it won't work out so terribly good. So the first tip is build your own model. Build your own ideas and model of your business and its competencies and what it can do, what it can't do, and don't rely on the pushes and pulls. In fact, be polite, but you instruct them. You come to them with a clear picture of the vision that you see and why you see it, and backed up, by the way, maybe with some accounts that are already signed up. Don't have them be pushing you. You show them.
Okay.
The second thing is, I wish that I hadn't. We raised $17 million. So we built a $24.4 billion exit with $17 million. $3 million of that was spent on the aborted ISDN product that I mentioned. 11 million was still in the bank. So that's 14 million. We only built Ascend with $3 million. And Ascend had hardware and software, not just software apps to build, but had all the mega hardware that had to be built and all the software that is on the boards. So I always look at companies and say, why in God's name does it take this much money to do what you're doing? Either you're infinitely dumb or I'm infinitely smart, one or the other. So I would tell them, try to bootstrap your company as much as possible. Try to rely on building revenue as quickly as possible so you don't need to go to the VCs and give away 75% of your company.
Do you remember what the return multiple was for the VCs?
18,000 or something. It was enormous. It's the best in all time for a venture-backed company. Number one of all time for a venture-backed company. People think it might be Google or this or that. It isn't. It was Ascend.
That's incredible. It's incredible.
Well,
yeah.
It's fun. It's, I'm proud of that. A lot of people, but I'll tell you the people that I'm proud of. The first 150 people in the company, most of them were millionaires. That's the receptionist, the accounting clerk. They used that money to create little businesses. They created whatever their heart's desire was, an accounting firm, a bar, whatever.
Yep, that's awesome. Okay, let's switch to the sunflower model. And I also want to say before we even
fun with questions, Zach. Is there any more good questions?
Well, actually, we've gotten 3 questions on the sunflower model, so we definitely want to address it.
Okay.
But I just want to point out that the sunflower model book, which Rob wrote, called Smart Ups, is available on the Entrepreneurship at Cornell website. It's very easy to find. I can put it up. I'll put the link in the chat as Rob's talking.
I'll do it, Zach.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Amanda. So Rob, why don't you just start with giving us the premise of the sunflower and then explain the methodology behind it. You've done some of that already when you talked about how you started the reboot of Ascend, but make it a complete package for us.
So I was doing it in real time while driving the rocket ship, which was not really a rocket ship at that point. So what I was trying to do is do some critical thinking in a collaborative way with a team of people that were very, very smart, but could easily fly off into entropy, just flying off in different directions. So by training, I'm a logician and mathematician, and I went, to higher degrees at PhD degrees and all of that. And I started to think about how could I do a logical reason process that would take a group of people and they would collar the wisdom of the group of people so that all got heard. There's no bullyism going on. That's one of Rob's rules of order. And we made a collective decision and a prediction. So as it started, we started with competencies, which is what is the core competencies for this company? And how did that start is a paper in Harvard Business Review by C.K. Prahalada. And that paper was called The Core Competencies of Honda. And it's probably the most received paper of all time for the Harvard Business Review. So anybody in the audience should absolutely get a hold of that paper. It's a wonderful paper. I never got to meet C.K. Prahalada. He died. In any case, I absorbed that paper and began to think about the core competencies with my team. I started to put them up on a whiteboard in the center of a circle. It was spoken wheel. And we had all the competencies in this spoken wheel. And then I asked the team to ideate. And the only rule for ideation was you had to use one or more of the competencies in that spoken wheel. You couldn't make an idea up that didn't have a competency inside. So you couldn't just float a balloon up that wasn't tied to a competency. So they started floating the balloons that became the choices or the ideation in that decision matrix. And when we got them up, I asked the next logical question was, how are we going to choose? I mean, you know, we have 10 things up here. How are you going to choose one versus, how are you going to rank order these? This is the question I asked. And well, we were all sitting there and they, well, I guess we'll argue. And I said, no, I don't want an argument. I want each of you to give me 3 or 4 criteria from your head. And they said, well, what the heck is a criteria? And I said, how about like competition? Competition is a criteria. How about, I love stealthiness. The competitors even know what you're doing. How about the rate of growth of the market that you're attacking? So I started giving, how about uniqueness? How about value equation? Value refers to how much money you make for the customer. So I started giving them 4 or 5 examples, and then an orgy, you know, ensued with criteria. So I think we had 20 or 25 criteria. So now you have a matrix of 20, 25 times the number of choices, right? So let's say you have 10 choices. That's 250 cells in that matrix. Now, how many people are in the room? Let's say 6 people in the room. So there's 6 times 250 events that you have to score, right? You're scoring each of the people. And we went through this, and the real fun part is when people don't agree in the scoring, because that's an opportunity to learn. That's not an opportunity to bully, that's an opportunity to learn. And so we went through really slowly. It took a long time, and we finally got the rank ordering, infrastructure 1, remote access 2, and so on.
Yep.
By the way, we—
Hey, Rob, just let me interrupt for 1 second. What was the name of the author you mentioned, CK?
CK Prahalada, Prahlad, Prahalada, CK Prahalada, Core Competencies, Honda.
Okay.
Way back.
Amanda, I hope you got that. You can put that back in the chat.
Harvard Business Review article.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, keep going, Rob. Sorry.
Right, no problem. So, you know, when we finally had the rank order, I asked the team what did they think of the process and what did they think of the conclusion. Well, they loved the process and they were kind of mystified by the conclusion. They were mystified because our existing business was in 4th or 5th place and they couldn't figure out how that happened. And I offered to go back over the whole thing again because I said, you must be missing some criteria. You must have held back from me and not given me criteria. At the thought of going back over this whole thing for another 3 days, they all melted down and agreed that they had given all of their criteria. You know, because I said, well, we'll just stay in the room another 3 days. In any case, we went and the next question is, what do we do with this information? And that, you know, ensued the walkabout. Up close and personal, I think we visited about 180 internet service providers around the world. Jay, who's on this webinar as my co-founder in Sunvia, is one of them. He owned Houston ISP. In fact, he owned several ISPs over time and was a big promoter of Ascend equipment back in the heydays.
So when you look at the model, Rob, at the Sunflower, you have your STEM, which is the underlying assumptions. Can you just explain that just a little bit?
Yeah, that's
and
kind
then
of—
you had it.
That's a really good thing to bring up, Zach. Thank you for bringing it. I generally ignore the STEM, but you can't ignore the STEM. The STEM is really a reflection of the external driving forces, not internal driving forces, but external driving forces. So one huge external driving force for the internet, for example, was regulatory, politics, government. I would suggest for almost every business you do today, you're going to have that one down on your list. There are other external driving forces. So for example, Uber and Lyft, if they had a STEM, might have thought of unions, right? Not really liking the loss of their entire market of New York City or Chicago or whatever the city were. So that would have been an external driving force. What do you do with external driving forces? Well, you try to look at them and assume they may happen. Do you have a way to protect against that? Do you have a way to counter that? It's a chess game.
Yeah. And by the way, I just quickly shared my screen. I'm hoping it works, but it shows a couple images of the Sunflower model and some nice photos of Rob. But so the underlying assumptions are is the STEM. The center is the core competency. Rob's already talked a lot about that. And then the petals are the products. And How many products do we need, Rob? I'm going to stop sharing now, but I just want people to see it in action.
Oh, I love people to give me lots of ideations. I don't hold back on that. In a sunflower session that would be moderated by myself, the more the merrier. I think one team came up with 80, choices. We kind of grouped them together later to have 12 super categories of choices, if you will.
Okay.
But more the merrier. What you're trying to find out is you're on an exploration. You're trying to find out what you're good at, if anything. And by the way, when I ask you what you're good at and what your competencies are, I failed to mention that I have a filter that I use. I use 3 things as my filter. One is uniqueness. How unique is it, this competency that you enjoy? How valuable is it to the accounts? In other words, how much money you save or make for accounts. Now, all products aren't making or saving money. Some are like a Rolex watch that has some other catch to it. I'm not as familiar with those, like selling Rolex watches, as I am in the more traditional type things. And the other is, how leverageable is your core competency? So we call that UVL, uniqueness, value, leverage, UVL. That UVL filters, 3 filters, are applied to the competencies in a matrix. Again, a scoring matrix the team did to find out the strong competencies from the weakos. We dropped all the weakos. We got rid of them. We only went with the strong. So this
is funny. So I've heard the term wackos, but now you've changed that to weakos. So concepts that are weak. So let's stay away from the wackos.
If we were here for hours, I'd have a whole new English language would actually be constructed.
Yeah, yeah, it'd actually be great. It'd be great. Okay, so that's actually super, and it provides a really good framework. And I want to encourage people to go into the Smart Ups book. It's all illustrated there.
By the way, that book is owned by Cornell Press. I gave it to Cornell Press years ago to do what they wanted with it, and I'm happy that it's available for all the Cornell.
Yeah, I want to make it clear. I never asked permission to put it on our website.
Yeah, I
so
don't
far,
have permission.
But so far, no one. Yeah, so far, no one's complained too much about it. So here's one: your commitment, core values, and what you stand for. Well, this is the view of this person who asking this question. So let me preface it by that. Your commitment, core values, and what you stand for are rare to see in younger generations. I'm not sure I agree with that, but this person certainly stated that. How do you think those values can be propagated further in the younger generations to have and create the honest success that you've had?
Yeah, I mean, any question on values is a great question. I don't know if I agree with the conclusion they had, but look, I mean, the values started early on, with I was the first to go to college. That was Cornell. And in my family, my dad had 3 jobs. My mom worked too. So the work ethic was extreme. When I went to Cornell, I had 3 jobs and 3 scholarships to pay for Cornell, because my dad was a milkman. It was hard for him to pay for Cornell University. So there was an extreme work ethic. When I got there, I even amped it up even more in that I decided to do math and physics to get a double degree in math and physics. So it's amazing that I met Terry at Cornell and married Terry, because I can't remember getting out of Olin Library or yours library, to be honest. So the work ethic begins. The ethic of, hanging tough and integrity, loyalty. Things go up and down in life. You can see in a marriage of 50 years, obviously it didn't always have a bed of roses during the entire time. So the grit that's required to sustain that is also the same grit that can sustain a startup easily.
Yeah.
I think it's in your total behavior and your upbringing and the way you conduct yourself. I also add courage and humility. You need to be humble to listen. Listening is so important, but to be a good listener, you have to be humble. because you can't go into a room thinking you have all the answers, because you do not have all the answers. No matter what your title is, you don't have.
Right. Absolutely. So actually, how did you end up at Cornell, by the way? I mean, besides that you applied, like why did you pick Cornell?
I don't know. I mean, I got into all the state schools that were free for me. And my dad noticed that I didn't seem to be extremely happy about that event. And he asked me what's going on. I said, well, I've always wanted to go to Cornell. And I think they're just so beautiful. And the engineering was such a great engineering school. I actually went to engineering physics when I joined Cornell. And he said, well, great. Did you get in? Did we apply? And I said, no, I didn't apply because we can't afford it. He said, well, affording it is my job. Applying is your job. So we spent a Saturday applying, and lo and behold, I got into, Cornell engineering physics.
And where did you grow up?
Huntington, Long Island.
Okay, so you're from New York. So that's one connection. I never associate you with New York State, because I've only known you in Montana, so yeah. I never really knew where you grew up. So you're from Long Island. So Cornell has a huge pull from Long Island.
I'm a Montana cowboy with Long Island roots.
Yep. I like the hat, by the way. It's a good. It's a very nice touch. So we are definitely over time, but if you don't mind, I'll take a couple other questions.
You can take as many as you want, Zach. This is fine.
Yeah, if folks on the webinar need to drop off, obviously we understand. So don't feel compelled to stay on.
I'll take it personal if you drop off.
So here's one. What are I'm reading up on my screen, sorry. What are the first steps to finding money to start your business? I hear a lot about ask friends and family, etc. But when you come from a background where your friends and family don't have anything to offer, where do you start?
So, I'm starting a company now with Jay. And the first thing we thought about, the two of us, and literally I'm now an entrepreneur again, is how do we get to revenue? How quickly can we get to revenue to self-fund the company? So everything went into what is the first stage product? How quickly can we get it? And what flow of revenues can we generate? And then given that we think it's going to take X months, then how much, the tiniest amount of money required to keep us going for that X months. So I'm very much into trying the bootstrap modes, because all the teams that I've seen that went on to heroic billion-dollar endings were bootstrapping type companies. They this philosophy. The other kinds of teams run around with their rice cups looking for money from VCs or angels or whatever. And first of all, they're not spending time in their business. They're running around with the rice cup. They don't know their business extremely well. And by the way, angels and VCs can shred you very quickly. And so you spend 80% of your time, you get a few grains of rice, but I would prefer that you figure out how quickly can I get to revenue and how tiny amount of money that I require to do that. Then in our case here, I'm self-funding it here.
Well, because you can, but what about for folks who don't have that?
Well, there are more avenues open to you now. You have angels galore, you have VCs galore. You also have Kickstarter, GoFundMe, and all of those things. Those are also an avenue that should be explored. I'm not saying that they're going to draw in, but I mean, if a guy can sell a cocktail table and have $8 million worth of tables sold, in 3 days, perhaps your business idea would appeal to people. But again, try to keep the amount of money. There's no magic formula with angels or VCs. They're both smart. They both are used to vetting people. The more you can put your business plan together, aka sunflower-like plan, meaning deep understanding of your business, the more impressive you are. And that helped me save my company with the board members. It'll help you fund your company with newbies.
Yep, absolutely true. I will say that the first $25,000 could be the hardest money to get when you don't have friends and family. I would also suggest applying to business plan competitions. particularly when you're a student. I'm not sure if this person who asked is a student or not, but it can really, really help. Separate topic. What are your thoughts on all the streaming wars? Do you think that, what do you think will come of all the proliferating internet-based media services that are offered by AT&T and Disney and you name it? What's going to happen? Any clues?
Well, funny you should ask. In our new Sunvia company, you can think of Sunvia, and I'm not going to tell you what it's doing precisely, but I'll give you an image. Think of 3 circles intersecting. One circle is Sunflower, which is a critical thinking platform, if you will. The other circle is machine learning AI, and the third circle is gaming technology. Okay. And the intersection in the sweet spot is where Sunvia is playing, in that sweet spot. So our first incarnation of bringing out the first product will come out on streaming channel. It'll come out on Twitch. And it'll be Rob and Jay, running live Twitch sessions, monetizing them. The monetization goes into Sunvia to help bootstrap Sunvia. And it also trains the avatars and everything else. It's a training for the AI.
Okay.
So, I think it's great. Am I a user of it? Hell no. I've never used any of it. I've never used Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, nothing. So my partner, Jay, is educating me. It's like climbing Mount Everest from the base of Mount Everest with a 100-pound pack on you, because it's really an education. But it does, especially the gaming world, it's just eye-opening to me how much money and how much enthusiasm is in that world. In the streaming world, equal, ditto. There's also a lot of craziness in it, but there's a lot of good stuff in it too.
Nice, that makes a lot of sense. So I think I'm gonna ask one more question. You highlighted the strength of team with all caps, in addition to technology, so team plus technology. How did you preserve the strength, or I'm sorry, preserve the sense of the team through the journey?
How did we preserve the what?
Sense, or like the semblance of the team.
It gets harder and harder. It's a very good question, by the way. In the early days, I would know every employee's name and what you were working on. I was a real walkabout guy inside. I hardly ever sat at a desk. I had a stand-up desk inside. But as time goes on, you can't know everybody's name. A funny story is after I came back from surgery on the spine, I'm walking around, and I woke up with some woman and said, "Hi, I'm Rob Ryan. What's your name?" And she says, "Mary something." And I said, "Well, Mary, where do you work?" And she goes, "Well, I work in marketing, production, marketing, blah blah blah." And I said, "Oh, that's just great. That's just great. Well, carry on." And she said, "Wait a second, where do you work?" And I go, "Up there." I wave, vaguely to the corner. She said, "That you can't work up there. That's the CEO's office up there." And I said, "Well, yep, that's true. Yeah, that'd be me." And then I sort of wandered along. But that's an illustration of you lose the sense of team, right? It gets larger and larger. What you hope is the spirit of innovation and creation and action-orientedness infuses the company. But you can't have that intimacy that you had when you were a startup.
Right, makes a lot of sense. Well, listen, Rob, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. We're gonna end now, and I will say when it ends, we're gonna get cut off all of a sudden. I think that's the way this Zoom thing works. So we don't have much time to say goodbye or anything. So we can all wave and say thanks for joining in. It's been great to have you all here. And if you haven't been looking at the chat, I do highly recommend that you join the Entrepreneurship listserv, which is again right off of the Entrepreneurship at Cornell website. It's incredibly easy to find. Join the listserv; it'll keep you up to date on